James, is it okay for you to start a tab at the Tumbled Wench? I don't know. You might have to. You might have to really impress yourself upon your server there, but she doesn't take a lot of guff from folks. She may look a little uncoordinated, but she has that dagger in her garter for a reason. Willow Nightwolf is offering some input here, and well, a playtest at Technatron. If you're out there, I think you were hoping that people might actually pick that mantle up and give some feedback on it.
Oh yeah, I would say once we give the groundwork, the story and everything like that, I would encourage everyone to go take this and run a session, um, and see what people think, and see if they think it's original, see if they think it feels a little bit more like a other module, or what you did to change it up. I think it would be really cool to see uh, this in action just for other people, and it might be a really fun random game for just a new group, or let alone a group that's been playing a while. Just a refreshing, different uh, setting for a while. But I will warn you, if you get a hardcore group that is taking a break, if they're taking a break, they're generally going to throw their most broken character, do the zaniest things they can, and really throw a wrench into the works. So be prepared. Um,
James, thank you very much for the bits, and I will make sure that on our orphanage page on our Discord, I will note that you have $4 in credit floating that you can spend. So thank you for the support there. All right, so Technatron, we have our plot points.
yes.
What are we gonna do with them? Where do we go next as we're going through this?
Well, I would say the perfect place to start next is we were talking about monsters and how they contrast, and they're part of the world. We've kind of already set up this goblin kobold thing, so I guess the next question is are we going to throw goblins in the hills or kobolds? And what's going to be the signifying thing to make them stand out? Or I would say something simple is they all wear black war paint or something of that nature.
And so you want me to put this as a point underneath initial mission, placing them in the setting, or is this where do we want this
Well,
to
the
go?
thing is the question is to us, where do we want the first interaction to happen? I would say at the cart chase would probably be the appropriate place, or the battle.
Okay.
And also, we talked about making something a little bit different, a reskinning, if you will. So I would say we should pick at least one of the characters to stand out a little bit bigger. What if there was a cobalt that was not a size category small, but medium, and was a little bit more brooding? Or possibly a monster or a kobold that is able to summon another version of itself, aka a Mythit, and reskin it as a kobold.
Ah, okay. All right.
Um, yeah, this is the case in point, and yeah, creativity. Yeah, we can use green makeup from a root that grows nearby, and I would say that's really cool because that makes me think we could get some survival checks and put that plant around the cart. A very unique flower or maybe some moss that is different, and maybe the kobolds of this territory use it as war paint, and maybe it has some sort of function. um Also, what I want to add in is also in the beginning of this module is a very good place to put things that players don't necessarily run into: survival checks, medicine checks, and things like that.
Noted.
But out to anyone, is there any monster that you think we should reskin or maybe put with the goblins? I mean, sorry, the kobolds? Or even do you have one, Maddie, that you would like to reskin in there?
Huh. Um. Offhand, nothing is coming to mind. Especially about our. I like the idea of our at least I listed it as a swollbold, that really big strong one.
Mm-hmm.
But something that we could do, if only as a demonstration of what you could do, if you do find yourself in a bit of a pinch, if you say, well, yeah, there's kobolds in the monster manual, but I want to mix things up a little bit. If you remember when we went to our, speaking of kobolds, to the Kobold Fight Club generator, we were able to generate a conflict of an appropriate level to what we desired, and then we just ended up reskinning the monsters into whatever we would want them to be.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, I suppose we could just come over to the Kobold Fight Club and say that I don't know. We probably have what we could presume 4 players. At what level are we presuming this one shot's going to be taking place?
If we're getting into the place, and we kind of talked about it before, um, about where things start coming into play is about level 3. I would say putting this about level 3 characters, 3 to 5, would be a place I would say makes total sense to start a campaign, but have some more resilient hit points and more of a variety of monsters that we can put in.
All right. So what I'm looking at, I made the expectation of 4 players at level 3.
Mm-hmm.
And then I took out the minimum and maximum challenge ratings so we can really get a diverse group. And then I put an Arctic um, terrain setting to see what
Ooh,
would exist in a cold environment that we could work with.
yeah, cold weather kobolds.
And so then I will hit a. If we're including a chase that might have some danger elements or the like, um, it might be the only fight. So we could probably get away with doing a random hard. If this is the
Oh
only
yeah.
like true combat, not that people can't get hurt outside of it, but so if we do this, we have a ghoul, a half ogre, and a warg. Would end up being a hard combat against 4 level 3 characters. And in that case, how then could we how could we reskin them, or how could we repurpose them to be specifically what we're looking for this combat?
Yeah. The thing is just simply changing. Well, of course, the first thing, the name, and then simple descriptors. I would say one of the things that I would do is with any of these monsters, we can kind of take pieces from them. Like if we were doing a half ogre, like maybe you give the kobold a really deep maw, and it's just kind of hulking to look at. Ghoul would be interesting for the fact is I guess you could present that as like a necromantic type kobold. That just brings up some questions all on its own. Like, how would we fit that into the game and have it be represented as a goblin? I mean, not goblin, kobold. I'm going to be messing that up for a while.
Well, if there's a kobold necromancer, I could already tell that they would have a vested interest in owning a dragon head.
Very true. And actually, with you saying that right there, kind of describes a narrative of what they would call out when they see the players in chase. Like that's already enveloping a bit of a character.
For the half ogre, I was thinking maybe that could be reskinned as the Swollbold. And what could be interesting is if that's presented as like a half human, half kobold, not a dragonborn, but that could show that the kobolds might have a relationship of sorts with the humans or the humanoids in whatever other kingdom on the other side of this dragon's territory are. And so that could show that there is a political affiliation or a cultural affiliation where if war breaks out, then there are these humanoids that could get drawn into a war alongside kobolds if there's this kind of interaction that's taking place.
Isn't there like it's not dragonborn, but they're a dragon type humanoid. I forget what they're called.
Lizard folk?
No, they're more draconic. I believe they have tails. They're like dragonborn, but a little bit more on the dragon side.
Saurians?
Could be
like Dragonbait, the character.
Yeah, dragon isn't Dragonbait though a lizard folk?
I think he's a Saurian.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll have to look into it. I might just be drawing something out of thin air that I think have seen before. But
there's the ones from Dragonlance, and those are the they're not the Dragonborn. They're the why am I derping on this? Shame on me. I'm going to go to the player's handbook because they're specifically mentioned in the Dragonborn segment here. The Draconians were the kind of draconic people of Kryn in Dragonlance.
Yes, I think that might be exactly what I'm thinking of. It sounds very familiar. But anyways, yeah, the warg being a hunting hound. Do you want to just keep it as a warg?
I think we could. It would blend in with a foresty environment. They could certainly survive in cold places too. And what would be interesting is goblins are known to ride wargs, and so too. Then perhaps the kobolds might have learned how to do that. Or in the middle of combat, the goblin NPC might be able to give some insight, like, oh, that's a warg. You watch out because they're super good at whatever. And it turns into, an environmental. We're describing the area. We're describing a history, a pattern, and it's also ingratiating the NPC with the player characters.
Oh yeah, and refortifying things is always a fantastic thing. For instance, even in rivalry between the goblins and the kobolds, you could even, because goblins are more simple, you could have them be very pissed off at their stinky breed wargs. They don't know how ride, and just have them always trash talking back and forth. I would say that's a element we can look into, as well as if we're getting goblins involved, we can have them be really nasty and pushing their agenda between, like, a more aggressive hate towards the kobolds, and how it doesn't necessarily line up, and probably use I would say coming up with a few slurs.
So it's kind of scripting out. I just listed it as a bullet point of banter in the middle of combat, where the Nilbog that's being escorted by the party could be taunting or calling names to the kobolds that came out to try and come after these people with the dragon head. And Tamarick, a kobold goblin war is presumably on the verge of breaking out over this mysterious dragon head. And thereby sucking in our player characters into something that's a lot larger than they are. As you normally do in the course of an adventure.
Mm-hmm. And there's definitely things we can go into later that maybe we don't keep we say that the dragon tongue is moving, and maybe that's the whole thing, they think it's a dragon head, but it's a Dracolich head without them knowing, and that could be a later reveal. But that's outside of what we're doing right now.
Yeah, James, I agree with you in that regard. There's a nice chart with some suggestions on running a chase as well in the Dungeon Master's Guide. All right, so we have ideas for some NPCs to reskin some monsters that would be appropriate for a combat. Now, running the skill challenge is really, how many successes before failures do you want, and what do you want to set the DCs for various tasks at being in the minutia here. So we're spreading out our information as we're making an outline of this one shot. Where do you want to focus next, or what do you want to produce some content for?
I would say we probably need, because this isn't a very common thing, I would say we need to focus on the chase, or essentially the cart going down the path. We need to look at vehicle, like, is anyone proficient in vehicles? We can give advantage there to that player for controlling the vehicle, and then we can also, like you were saying, do checks. And then I would also like to see some sort of combat for other players to do to assist in the situation.
All right, for all of you who have your Dungeon Master's Guides handy, chases, if you want to use this as just the mechanics, or you want to draw inspiration, chases are described on page 252. And so it'll tell you about things like spells and attacks, because that's what Technatron was getting at, where a chase can be a running or rolling combat. Things like dashing, how to end a chase. There are some different escape factors to consider, and of course you can modify this table as you'd like. And let's say that you have, that if we're doing a wilderness chase complication, We know that it's set in kind of a snowy forest region with some mud. We could very well expand this and to go from 10 results to as they're presented to more or less. We could take the same 10 and give them a wintry twist. Or if we want more, because this is saying that 50% of the time a complication will occur on a round, we could increase that as well. Hey, Misfit, where do I sign up for the Dungeons and Durgans? You've come to the right spot. Welcome.
Welcome.
I'm gonna roll 1d20 just to see. Got a 2. All right, so if we're running a chase, a complication in the wilderness is uneven ground threatens to slow your progress. Make a DC 10 Dexterity Acrobatics check to navigate the area. On a failed check, the ground counts as 10 feet of difficult terrain. So there, in this case, if you didn't want it to be Dexterity Acrobatics, this could very well be Dexterity Land Vehicles. This could be something along the lines, if they're willing to, I don't know, someone is willing to sort of like jump out of the side of the cart and like stomp on the ground to try and like lift up the cart and use the momentum to carry it forward over the brambles. That could be an athletics at disadvantage or something, but it's creative thinking.
Oh yeah.
And so if you're familiar with a chart like this, you can call for some very adaptive options. Misfit, are there loot boxes? Well, there are. I guess you can count miniature boxes as kind of loot boxes. Although I should be careful about saying that, because if there's litigation against loot boxes, I don't want to, injure. I don't want to injure the channel in some sense. So I will say there are not loot boxes. However, there are boxes of pre-painted role-playing miniatures that you can sponsor.
That's a safe play.
And it is very clearly not a pay-to-win situation.
Oh yeah. Self-sustaining ecosystem.
Tamrick thinks that chases are great, but that they can be even more fun if they're somewhat rigged, so that the tension keeps going. I agree with that, but maybe not the concept of rigging it, but rather making sure that you are pressing your PCs for roleplay narrative to explain why they're going to make the check that they're going to make. So in other words, if the prompt isn't so much going by what the DMG asks about an acrobatics check with an arbitrary DC of 10, instead, all you do is just say uneven ground threatens to slow your progress. What are you doing? How are you going to react to this uneven ground? And then you can leave it to the person whose turn it is next, or however you're running things. And by the way, it is an official stream now. If any of you have the cat butt emote because you're a subscriber, please do share the cat butts in chat. This does talk about, by the way, designing your own chase tables, splitting up in case, I don't know, someone says, I'm going to bail and I'm going to try and, I don't know, knock this old tree down in front of our chasers. I'll catch up with you later or something, because that could happen over the course of a chase. And so there's some really good tips and tricks in here.
I just thought of something interesting. If they take the dragon head, and we were talking about the tongue wiggling, what if they have the dragon head in the cart, and then from underneath the tongue, a goblin comes out and starts taunting the kobolds?
Oh, so wait, so there's a hidden goblin in the mouth the whole time?
Exactly. That could be something that's interesting, and they essentially get a weird ally that could lead into the goblin breakout later. And if the players find it earlier, it could be a goblin that kind of could be an NPC that essentially tries to get them to take it to the town. I'm just thinking of something that will essentially do the therefore and but situation, so we can tie everything all together. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself with the combat that's happening.
Where would you like to go from here then? I've been
Um,
making notes about all this on
oh
our blank sheet.
yeah. Well, I think we kind of alluded to the next step. Once they get through this battle, they're going to make their way into town. So the thing is I think that's where the arrest, and we have the kind of the soldiers that are a little bit more gruff and not agreeable, almost fighting with the players during their arrest, and then we'll have the good cop come in. And I would say building descriptors, kind of like we were saying, the Andy Griffith type character. And we had that one generator, so we could kind of generate up some characters and build off of those as well. I think that's what we're going with.
We should probably also have uh, at least a representative of one of the merchants guilds, as that seems to kind of be the triggering point or the catalyst
Mm-hmm.
for the arrest was it was to turn in or to otherwise maybe have this dragon head appraised, and that then could send the ripples like, yep, this is the real deal. It's not an illusion. It's not paper mache. It's not. Um,
Oh, what was Andy Griffith's side character? It was always goofy. Oh, I can't remember.
oh, that was Don Knotts' character. The
Yeah,
uh the kind of the oh shoot
but I'm saying we can kind of give one thing that I always like to do is kind of give a nod to things that are cultural or iconic,
Barney
and then
Fife. Oh, James just said it too in chat. Barney Fife.
yeah, Bart, yes. But I'm saying we can D&Dize those as characters. So, like for example, uh, instead of like burritos, they're dragitos
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. And so you just do stuff like that where people can kind of align with it. Like I've even had pizza shops, and then there was a bunch of turtles around.
I have my cat trying to fight for the very limited desk space between my keyboard and me. So hopefully there's no stray letters that are. All right, now I look clear. All right, so we have some NPC considerations, and so these would be characters that we would want to flesh out through a randomizer, kind of like what you were showing off the other day.
Yeah,
Or the DMG also has a segment on building NPC characters too.
we can either or. But I would say anything that gives us a basis to build our character and make it a little bit deeper. Um, and like I was saying, anything that can do the work for you, or at least get the ball rolling, is usually something worth doing. Kind of like with the monsters, it's much better to start with a reskinning and then understand from there what you want to homebrew or not homebrew, instead of sitting there with a piece of paper looking at like all the stats and everything and then coming up with a monster. Usually that can take much more time,
Yeah, yeah.
and I know that all too well. I Here's a little side story. I For a little bit I ran a campaign in Pathfinder that I had this friend that was all about mid maxing, finding broken characters and stuff. I I wanted to challenge myself, so I said, make characters for everyone else in the party, work with them, and get something that they want. But you can break it as much as you want, within exceptions of like these books. And I'm going to see how long I can like run this game, and I can see if it can function. And we're starting at like level 18. So we're already high end, broken characters, and I just wanted to see if it could go on. Thinking that it would just be a session that lasted like one or two, ended up lasting almost 2 years. So I can tell you,
Mm.
building custom monsters and stuff like that was something that I was constantly have to do, and it ended up never had to use it. But I had uh, a ooze ghost swarm with wizard levels and other feats in case they ever got out of hand, because it was ungrappable. You were unable to mind control it. You were Anytime you went to hit it, it would take less damage, and if you ever did hit it, there was a chance it could multiply.
A ghost ooze swarm with wizard levels. I love it.
Yeah, but there were some crazy things.
We should put a note, especially about the initial mission that would place them into the setting. We should make some NPC notes about the Nilbog, or if not a Nilbog, a goblin that they're
Mm-hmm.
escorting.
Well, I mean, I think that's a pretty good starting point. They start at an inn in another town, asked to take some cargo somewhere else, and this is just along of the ride. So I guess we would have to make up an NPC in the beginning as well that would contract. But maybe we could make it simple like a farmer.
Yeah, yeah. I think keeping it simple like that would be good.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I mean, that would also indicate that that they have a good cart. I mean, if it's doing farming work, but they don't
Mm-hmm.
have like an ultra awesome top of the line cart that they may be able to just redline by doing all sorts of ridiculous stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
At least not too often. The rule of cool, I think, can win out at a tabletop. But if you know you're in a farmer's cart, it might be able to take that one good bump, but after that, the planks start getting loose. I'm getting ideas for what to throw at you. Coffee. I already know what I'm going to be throwing at you all on Tuesdays. It's just a matter of y'all getting to that point. But we've been going through things almost on a day by day basis, while the other party's just sitting down and doing research on a week by week basis. So I'm gonna need you to understand your Celine superpowers from drinking all her blood, so we can keep things moving along.
Um, yeah, I would say, I don't know about you, but I tend to like to be about anywhere from 3 to 6 games ahead of my players in planning.
I can't say that I would go 6. I
Yeah.
might try and stay two sessions ahead. I mean, I ultimately see on the horizon where I want things to go. You know, kind of where I want things to end up, or
Mm-hmm.
what a final confrontation might end up being. But I try not to plan for too much ahead, because things can just happen.
Derail.
And Tuesday's a very good example of that. I never would have suspected the party would have split, but they did, and they split for legitimate reasons. And here we are, and I've had to change my plans along the way.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you on a similar note to what you're talking about, Technatron. The Tuesday campaign, I expected that we would get through this in a couple months. I'm like, yeah, this should be a pretty short, kind of fun, concise campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Some battles, some looking into some things, a little investigation. And I was prepared to run it for a couple months, see where it goes from there. And here we are almost a year later. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have learned things about different cultures playing D&D and stuff like that. I notice Europeans like taking their time over situations. I once had a group sit at the edge of a cliff for a good solid hour debating if there was a magical bridge or not.
huh.
That they couldn't do, and they were testing out all the things, and I was just describing that they couldn't see the bottom and they're on the edge of a cliff, and they might as well have had a picnic. It just lasted forever.
Yeah.
And I was trying to be cool, not railroad or anything like that.
Well, sometimes you do have to force the player's hands by, throwing a bunch of monsters at them while they're sitting and talking about their plans because they've been sitting and talking about their plans too long.
Mm-hmm. But anyways, back to the situation. So we were describing a farmer, and so maybe it was just a simple task for some gold that was promised to the players, and maybe they knew someone in town that would get them some or pay them the rest. That makes more sense, at least to me. The farmer would pay them half up front, and then when they complete the mission, someone in town will pay off the rest, but maybe they'll never meet that person. And that's another interesting NPC because maybe they do bring the cart into town and the shipment, but they get arrested, but the person still wants to fulfill
Mm.
the debt.
So there's not just the farmer that's the quest giver, but then there's the recipient that
Mm-hmm.
would pay them the rest of the money or something upon delivery. Now you all can see that as we're planning this out, there's a lot more NPCs and things to consider at the start of our one shot, and that's because as we're starting the world, we have to introduce the world and some basic tenets and how it operates, as well as some touchstones within it.
Exactly. Um, but is there any NPC that you're seeing that might uh, need to get put in? I think we have all the NPCs. Maybe I don't know. Do you like that kind of goblin under the tongue hidden, or
If we do that, I don't have a problem with it. If we change the narrative of the one shot slightly, so that if we are going to be using a farmer as the catalyst for the adventure, which is
mm-hmm,
fine, supply some
mm-hmm,
money up front, nice easy job, take my cart into town to get fixed. Here's some money for you for your trouble, and here's the money for the cartwright or whatever.
mm-hmm,
On the way, they see this other cart that's tipped over, so they don't have an NPC with them at first, or rather, on the way to the head, about halfway, this is where they meet the goblin or the nilbog. That's especially
mm-hmm,
charismatic. Says, "Hey, where are you going?" And of course, we describe the world as These humanoids have, a good in with goblins, whatever contracts or treaties or whatever. And so seeing a goblin on the road isn't necessarily cause for super alarm. And this goblin says, "Hey, yeah, I'll travel with you. I'm going that way." And then they come to the dragon head on the cart and they go, "Oh, wow, look at that. It's a dragon head on a cart." Well, wouldn't you want some help taking that into town? Meanwhile, it's indicating that the goblins are the ones in possession of the dragon head. And so therefore we could have a goblin or two hidden in the mouth. Or
Yeah.
maybe it's just the one. There's the one who went to go find help, and the other one who hid either because he's a coward or because he wanted to defend the head from anything else. The goblin NPC ingratiates itself to an unsuspecting party. They find the dragon head, go to recover it, and then of course that's when this avalanche or whatever's occurring, probably caused, maybe after the fact they discover, probably caused by the kobolds. When they find out that the avalanche or whatever didn't work, the kobolds catch up and there's actually a combat, like a proper combat.
Mm-hmm.
And there's banter, and that's when we discover that there's some high tension between the goblins and kobolds that we didn't know about. And then the goblins take the head and that wagon into town. It could even be the original's farmer property was lost in the avalanche, and all they had was this nice high quality cart that the goblins got from somewhere, or from someone, in order to transport this head that they got from somewhere or someone. And then they go to trade it in, and upon either suspicion of the dragon head or the goblins themselves might have been, just because you have a treaty doesn't mean there's not bad individuals, or even the fact that the farmer's property was damaged or gone, and until they find out what happened, especially because there have been conflicts or bandits in the woods, the party is to be kept under observation. They're kind of held in jail overnight or something. But the goblins, the goblins need the party's help to break the head out of storage. And so that night they orchestrate the jailbreak, and of course that's when we would leave, because that's an excellent twist at the end that would want your players to come back for more.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I was also thinking when you were saying that they can start out with a crappy cart, and maybe the cart just completely disassembles on the way there, and by the time they keep on moving with the horse or whatever it is and moving the wares, they come across the dragon cart that's tipped over, and that would give them more incentives to hook it up and bring it into town.
Do you have any insight for Tamarik's question?
Uh, Um, how to introduce an NPC that wasn't part of the plot? Well, I would say kind of what we were going at. NPCs are the voices of the world, so I would say the best thing to do to introduce an NPC is to give them a meaning or a reason for existing in the world that the players need to essentially invest in, wherever how small or how big it may be. But of course, if it's just that fun NPC that's just tagging along, the friendly surfer stoner I always find is a fan favorite. Whoa, you guys want to get on my water vehicle, man? We need to go over there and we are going to ride some curly toes.
It is a very disarming kind of. All right, so this guy's probably cool and won't shank us.
But yeah, I think the disassembling cart, like just the crappy cart that doesn't make it, would give them incentive to take the cart. Maybe even leave the dragon head and take the cart into town.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? But I think that would be a good way to at least get them to on that level of, hey, here's a cart that we can take. Oh, no problem.
Tamarick, in short, as you would address me as well in there. Um, if they haven't met the NPC yet, then either don't have the NPC exist or just force a manifestation, because your players aren't going to know in either case. If you already know about the world or the situations happening in it, as Technatron said, your NPCs are the voices of the world. They're the manifestations of the thoughts, the feelings, the politics, the emotions, and such. So, hi Tuscan, welcome. So just have a manifest or not. Do you, if you can at least offer a halfway plausible reason for that NPC to be there or to show up. I mean, I have to do it all the time in Tomb of Annihilation. We've lost 22 characters throughout the adventures in Chult, let alone now we're actually sealed inside kind of an end game area. I don't want to get into too many details. And so, how do you have new characters show up inside this kind of secret area inside of this big meat grinder jungle as it is? But with a little bit of imagination, just trust yourself. Pay attention to your own narrative so far. Pay attention to the environment, and then your NPCs will be a product of it. Willow Knight, well, thank you very much for the follow.
And I would also say something as simple as us in this situation, we have everything built in. We're talking about goblins and stuff like that. If I had a NPC that I was trying to put in as well, and let's just say it's a wizard, I would just say, well, if we're putting in a wizard now, why would the wizard be in the world? Well, maybe they need to actually get components off of the dragon's head, and maybe they're entirely enthusiastic. And now we have an old kooky wizard that is so stoked that they see a dragon head, and I'm already thinking of, well, I haven't been over there. What? A dragon head? My days! And there you go. Describe that character, a old kooky wizard,
Mm.
like staff in hand, like just running up to the cart. We can already envision that in the world, I imagine. Oh, thank you.
He does do very good voices, Tamrick.
Discount Matt Mercer.
I am going to put a note for the skill challenge because I forget offhand if skill challenges are actually discussed in 5th ed. If not, it definitely took place in 4th edition, and I love skill challenges. A couple things to note: what is the DC of the checks? And another thing that I do. Now this is a more of a custom rule. I tend to only allow for a certain number of the same skill to be used. So, for example, if I'm looking for, I don't know, you set the successes to failures ratio before the task is complete. You need either 7 successes before 5 failures, 4 successes before 10 failures. I mean, set it for what you want of the difficulty to be. Because, of course, you change the difficulty number and then the number of successes to failures. But something that I could encourage, especially if you want something more of a drawn-out process, would be to limit the number of times a skill can be used. By the not just by the same character, but as a pool within the party. So, for example, if I say as a condition for this skill challenge, you can only use a skill twice throughout the challenge. That means between everyone in the party, you can only roll Arcana twice and have a meaningful effect. And that can reflect not just an arbitrary difficulty modifier to the challenge, but if you've already thought about it once, let alone twice, there's no new information that's going to be coming to mind. and so you're going to have to think about things differently. And I also, well, when I run a skill challenge, I ask not just for a dice roll and a skill, I ask for the action. What are you doing? And then we can even just interpret a skill based on the narrative for how you want to continue the results from the prior check, so that it turns into an ongoing story as people are climbing over the thing, as they're holding the mouth open with athletics, and then someone's looking inside the head with medicine, and then someone else is I don't know, is using nature to try and determine if something is viable or poisonous or whatever, or natural even. And so it causes it could kind of take the place of a battle because it's still resource management, but you have certain battlefield conditions that can also lead to modifiers. I mean, if someone does excellently in your skill challenge, if we're going around the table and I do very well in medicine, where I'm able to say, oh yeah, definitely this thing was cut off by a battle axe. Here's the jagged lines around the neck that prove it, and all this other stuff. And someone wants to roll nature to discover, I don't know, something that could be appropriate. My check on medicine may very well grant advantage or disadvantage on the next check to be made, given the circumstances. So if you are going to run a skill challenge, make sure that you do that. And while you said things like that would focus on medicine or survival, by putting some kind of a cap, whether it's on a skill, you say, well, Arcana can only be used twice, but the others are okay, or survival, maybe you uncap because survival is like an ongoing tracking process. So why limit that? You could say that mental checks, so anything that's charisma, wisdom, or intelligence, can only be made twice, but physical skills can be used on an unlimited number of times. Things along those lines. Have fun and get people involved to describe their actions, and not just use their skills like it's a button you press that separates you from the world.
Also, understand you can do group skill checks, and you can take the pass or fail off of everyone's roll, and you can also do succeed over time. Those are two things also that are very handy. So
Yeah, yeah.
you can say everyone can roll this once, and depending on what the group roll is, I'll take the average, or I'll take whoever rolls the highest.
Some. Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying, like, there's multiple ways that you can do skill checks. That's kind of a way to keep the pacing. Uh, Pacing's really important in D&D
Mm-hmm.
because I imagine you've run into this, Maddie, but like sometimes when things get a little too sluggish, and you're like, okay, guys, we need to make the next step. Like, let's stop trying to turn the crystal into an animated object and stuff like that. Sometimes it's good to give them a point where they can succeed or fail.
It in a sense, James, it could be luck based, or I can understand why you might feel that way, and that's why if you're inserting the narrative, it's not just a dice roll, because the dice roll could be modified if you want to offer advantage or disadvantage, or you might decide to set the DC differently for this one check because of the way it was described. So it is still the roll of a die, but there are ways that you could manipulate that. And something else that you could do as well would be if you set kind of a baseline difficulty. I don't know. You call it. You say it's a level 3 party. I don't know. I think it's on a DM screen or elsewhere. Like what would constitute as a hard check or something. But let's say that the DC is 13. And we go through with successes or failures, and we ended up having something like a 10, a 13. So that would have been one. We got a 16. Awesome. Someone ends up just like getting a 21 because they were super the best at this. then the next person like gets an 8, because of course that happens. And we're going through and we're kind of generating some numbers here. So I guess in this case, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that would have been 5 successes before 5 failures. So it was so this one ended up being a split. It was arbitrary in this case. But what you could do then is say, all right, I'm going to score the total performance. That way there's always progress being made. And so that way it could be kind of luck-based what you're talking about, James. But what you're doing is you're always letting every check make some kind of progress, but perhaps at a cost. Someone takes some damage if they fail an athletics check because they sprain their ankle or something. But the task still succeeds. There's just something carrying forward because we, especially in a one-shot, we want to push the narrative. We want to keep the action going. And what you could do then at the end is you can score it and say, okay, so a 13 is 1 point. And so if we go to a 10, that's 0 points. And if we come back to a 7, that is minus 1 point. And then we continue that going up here. So then a 16 is 2 points, and a 19 is 3 points, and then we could just say like 20 plus is 4 points. And you can modify this scale as well. Now what you do, or what you can do, I should say, I don't want to say this is the only way to do it, is you say, all right, so we have a 0, a 1, a 2, a 4, a minus 1, a 0, a 1, a 2, a 0, and a 0. So we have 3, 7, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you then tally this up at the end when everyone can catch their breath. And you look at the group and say, all right, so you've had 9 successes or 9 points or however you want to quantify it. And you can reference then as a DM, a chart or something. So if they had, like 0 to 5 was some kind of a reward. 6 to 10 was an even better reward. And 11 to 15 was an even better reward. And somehow if they actually managed to score, so if this is 10, even then, so 10, we could possibly have 40 if everyone just maxed out. But let's then just say that we had 16 plus. And this could end up being a physical reward. This could be inspiration. This could be a boon of some kind that you offer. That would be beyond inspiration. We're talking like invoking, I don't know, not a mechanical role, but you can call for help in a roleplay situation, or you can call in your boon, and the difficulty on the that the DM is inflicting can change. This could honestly just be something like and we have like minor, standard, major, super good. So they scored a 9, so that's going to be here, which would be kind of standard. And so you can say, all right, so after the chase, you noticed a wooden box built into the floor of the cart, had jostled open. Inside is a treasure parcel. And then you could say, You could indicate it specifically. You can roll it. For the 11 to 15, you can say as above, but one level higher or something, or they get more money, or it starts out with money and then a money and a magic item, things like that. So there's a lot of ways that you can then reward, which, especially if people sprain their ankles or you did have some botches, it could help to kind of soothe things, or you could even just throw in a healing potion as an emergency medical kit that they found in the cart after things had happened. Yeah, depending on how you score it, Tamrick, you could honestly, if you want to be a little bit more brutal, if 13 is your goal, and you say 13's a minimum, I'm going to give them 0 points for just getting by. Like, this is just for a success, nothing resounding. And so then you could then make things more punishing, where if they get a 10, 11, or 12, that's minus 2 points. Because they honestly shouldn't be bungling because you put the baseline so low. You could have it be -1, or you could go from a -1, but if they really get 7 or below, that's a -3. We're not even having a -2 involved in here, because that's an absolute botch, in my opinion. And then meanwhile, you go 1, 2, and then 4 for a 20 plus, because that's super amazing. So curve it how you want. Just make sure as a DM you play around with the numbers. So if we scale it this way, then that's going to change things, down here. So, sorry if I was talking over you there, Technatron.
Oh, no. You take the floor whenever you need to. Skill checks have never been so vivid.
I love narrative skill checks. It's more than just I move 5 feet, check for traps. I want to encourage descriptive storytelling from them and to interact with the environment. Also, I owe a thank you to Rio Quetzalcoatl for the follow. So thank you for coming aboard. Technatron, what else might we need then for the construction of this the construction of this one shot?
I think we have a few things. We were talking about the ambiance last time, the weather, the conditions. We kind of said there's going to be bumps or terrains inside of the chase, but overall feel and smell we were going on about. And also we can give a little overall description of the city or town, I imagine, because that's going to have influence. I always like putting some sort of monument or building that stands out. For example, like a temple that is devoted to Loth, or however you want to pronounce it, Louth or Loth, is really going to draw a big line, especially if players know who that is. Or Shar, for example. If Shar's around, that probably means there's some sort of cave system nearby, or death is happening. But it can even be as simple as putting a large gem or some sort of strange item in the center of the town that makes it distinctive.
If any of you need a prompt in order to follow Technatron's advice, you can find such things in the Dungeon Master's Guide. There's a list of monuments. There's a list of kind of weird locales.
Mm-hmm.
There's a list of buildings, including things like temples, that you can find. You can generate the ruler's status, the current calamity going on here, the type of tavern that's here. Scrolling back up, I mean, there's obviously a bunch of dungeon creation tables. If you even just want to know where is this going to take place, I need an adventure seed. In the Shadowfell, buried in volcanic ash. A dungeon location is in a glacier, or it's on a promontory. It's even underwater, that kind of a thing. and so you can always find inspiration, like it, because I understand how aggravating it is. You know you want something, but you're not sure how to, how to get it started, how to catalyze it, how to describe it. You have this cool thought, but how do you manifest it? And Technatron is offering so many awesome ideas on how to conceptualize the area. But if you're not sure, oh, what would be cool? I don't know. Let's.
Well, one thing you going through that popped out to my head is, well, you said Shadowfell. What if there was a tavern that was on the material plane, but kind of like lost into the Shadowfell, so a piece of the Shadowfell exists in the material plane, and it's a bar. That that right there, like, instantly makes people like, what? There's, like, it actually physically exists. So when you go through the door, you're inside the Shadowfell. When you go outside the door, you're back in the material plane, but yet you can still see it on the material plane. I would say that right there gives a very unique and very iconic thing inside of a town.
Tamrick, tell you what, going off of Technatron's advice, roll me a d20, please. Just type in exclamation point 1d20, no spaces. Because I want to know what this town that we're supposed to deliver the farmer's wagon to. But there's something about this town that's more than just whatever, a sleepy farming village, or miners, or a fishing village, or something along those lines. Something exists here that's just beyond what you might find to be a generic Western European medieval fantasy town with a bunch of like thatched roof houses and like a simple like 2-story inn. Oh, you got to add the D20 on there too. Exclamation point 1d20. Stops on an 11. All right, so the town of Kiramat, and who knows where I could have gotten the name Kiramat from. It is just unintelligible where I could have drawn that name and inspiration. The town of Kiramat has a monument that is a ruined or toppled statue of a person or a deity. That's your cue. That's your prompt. Now you can go through the 3 whys. Why is it ruined? Why is it toppled? Those are 2 different things. Is it natural? Supernatural? Was it because of economic circumstances that was just neglected? Is it an ancient ruin that no one really believes in anymore, but no one's really done anything about it? Because why bother?
Or it could be something interesting that, I mean, I like putting this stamp, especially when I'm in Forgotten Realms, but I like making temples to Jublex. So Jublex is always fun to mess around with. So like a singular red eye.
Does it sway in the breeze a little bit if it's really windy out?
Oh yeah.
So we have found instant inspiration that has stories of its own. Those could be clues to lead further on. And if you don't go beyond the one shot, what, you've just fleshed out the world, made it kind of cooler. You've given something memorable. People will remember the town of Kiramat as having this kind of like moss-covered old ruined statue. And it may not have a bearing in the one shot, but if the players do decide to continue on, that statue might be a vital clue to restoring peace or something along those lines. Maybe they find that that's actually a statue of the dragon whose head they have, and that was the humanoid form that the dragon took. And I don't know if they can get the head to turn humanoid and put it on the statue, because the statue's missing its head too. I don't know, it comes alive, or I don't know. There's all sorts of stuff you could do. It doesn't even have to be that. It could be something fantastic and beyond even that kind of spur of the moment recommendation.
Well, and yeah, that right there, you just created another plot hook right there for the dragon being a physical person or being that was maybe sought after and looked at. Uh, Maybe it could have been part of the civilization before it, and it's returning home. Who knows?
And yeah, that's and so I think Tamarick, we might have been on the same level there, because you're saying it could even be of the dragon. I was thinking that it's just a humanoid, because I defaulted to a humanoid statue. There's nothing saying this prompt couldn't mean that there's a dragon statue that's missing its head,
Oh, yeah,
and
that's true.
and maybe this could somehow complete it, or it's a clue or a key. It's foreshadowing, it's symbolism, that kind of a thing.
The dragon wagon.
Um, all right. Do we have anything else to that we need to consider or fill in for notes here? I mean, obviously we can sit down and spend 10 hours looking up stats. Like putting the stats down for the kobold attackers, and making a bunch of sort of background. It's not difficult, but it's easy math. It could just be time consuming. But
Oh yeah,
broadly, is there anything else that we need to consider?
uh, the title, the dragon wagon, and yes, we do need loot. Some sort of XP or some sort of.
Yeah, plunder loot. I saw the picture that you did get the V5 book. Welcome, because I think you're going to have an amazing time with it. Roger's saying that we could use a treasure chart. That could very well be for the for the skill check, or for something along those lines. So why don't we do this then? Why don't we get up and take another break? When we come back, then we can spend about another hour or so, maybe putting some finishing style touches on this. We can talk about treasure tables. We can talk about stats and stat blocks, and maybe go finish out any conceptual thinking, and then get a little bit into the I don't want to say nitty gritty, like it's bad or it's too difficult, but we can start adding the details, now that
Mm-hmm.
we're building things one step at a time.
I completely agree.
All right. Well, then, everyone, we'll be back in just a little bit. I'll see you then.